The small town of Oakwood Harbour had always been known for its harsh winters and Victorian architecture that withstood the test of time, but few knew of the dark secrets kept in its antique shops. Among the locals, stories circulated about cursed objects that carried more than just the weight of history. They brought with them inexplicable energies and presences that defied rational understanding. It was against this backdrop that Sarah Thompson, a respected history professor from Boston University, found something that would change her life forever. Specializing in 19th century material culture, Sarah had published numerous academic papers on how everyday objects revealed profound aspects of Victorian society. But nothing in her academic training could have prepared her for what she was about to discover during her summer vacation in Maine. The antique store, Relics and Memories, was located away from the main street in a narrow alley that few tourists ventured to explore. The establishment belonged to Harold Jenkins, an 87-year-old gentleman whose blue-gray eyes seemed to carry the knowledge of several lifetimes. When Sarah entered the shop on that rainy July afternoon, the tinkling of the bell above the door seemed to echo longer than would be natural. Harold observed her with a look that mixed curiosity and apprehension, as if he could foresee the fate awaiting the visitor. "Some find what they seek, others find what they should avoid," he muttered as Sarah approached the back of the store, where a collection of porcelain dolls was arranged on a Victorian shelf. Among all the valuable items, Art Nouveau jewelry, engraved pocket watches and music boxes, it was one particular doll that immediately captured her attention, a porcelain girl with a sky-blue dress, meticulously painted golden hair, and glass eyes of such a deep blue that they seemed to contain the ocean itself. As Sarah examined the doll, a strange sensation ran down her spine, a mixture of fascination and discomfort that she rationalized as merely admiration for the exceptional quality of the craftsmanship. "This is the work of the renowned craftsman Victor Blackwood from 1887, explained Harold, approaching cautiously. "He created dolls for families who had lost children as memorials. This particular one has a peculiar history." Sarah noticed the hesitation in the old merchant's voice, but her academic interest spoke louder. When she asked about the price, Harold seemed reluctant to sell it, mentioning that the doll had returned to his shop 3 times over the years, always after unfortunate incidents with its owners. "Perhaps this doll is waiting for the right owner," said Sarah, trying to dispel the tension with a smile. Harold finally agreed to sell the piece, but made a point of handing over a small card with his personal number. "If you notice anything unusual, don't hesitate to call me any time," he said, as he carefully wrapped the doll in tissue paper. Sarah thanked him for his care, attributing the vendor's behavior to small-town superstitions, not imagining that this would be the beginning of a journey to the boundaries between the world of the living and something far beyond human understanding. Sarah's trip to Oakwood Harbour was meant to be just a relaxing break from her busy academic routine. After an exhausting semester advising theses and organizing an exhibition on Victorian artifacts at the University Museum, she longed for quiet days exploring old bookstores and walking along Maine's rocky coast. Her small room at the Blue Lighthouse Inn offered a breathtaking view of the Atlantic Ocean, and mornings were filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and homemade bread. It was during her 3rd day in town that an unexpected storm forced her to seek shelter, leading her to the alley where she found the Relics and Memories shop. The doorbell emitted a melancholy sound when she entered, shaking the water from her coat and observing the interior filled with treasures from the past. The air inside the store was dense with the smell of old wood, dusty books, and something indefinable that reminded her of dried flowers and candle wax. If you've ever felt that instant, inexplicable connection with an object, as if it were calling to you, leave the word connection in the comments. I want to know how many of you have experienced this strange phenomenon that science still cannot fully explain. Harold Jenkins emerged from the shadows at the back of the store as if he had materialized from the air itself. "Looking for something specific or just escaping the rain?" he asked in a voice surprisingly clear for someone his age. Sarah explained her profession and interest in historical artifacts, to which the old antiquarian nodded with a glint of recognition in his eyes. "I have something that might interest a historian," he said, guiding her beyond a faded red velvet curtain to a room that Sarah hadn't initially noticed. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees in this new environment, where glass display cases exhibited meticulously organized collections, ivory fans, music boxes, mourning jewelry, and, in a special corner under soft lighting, the collection of dolls. "These are my most valuable pieces," explained Harold, "each with its own story, some happier than others." Sarah examined the collection with an expert's eye, recognizing rare specimens from German and French manufacturers of the 19th century. It was then that her eyes fell upon the doll of the girl in the blue dress. Unlike the others, this one wasn't in a display case, but sitting in a small carved wooden chair as if it were a special guest in the room. "May I?" asked Sarah, already extending her hands toward the doll. Harold hesitated for an almost imperceptible moment before nodding. Upon touching the cold porcelain, Sarah felt a strange electrical current run through her fingers, which she attributed to static electricity. What she couldn't explain, however, was the sudden wave of melancholy that invaded her, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. "It happens to everyone who touches her," commented Harold, watching carefully. "This doll was created by Victor Blackwood for the Miller family after the death of their daughter Catherine in the fire of 1887. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to receive more stories like this one. Every antique object carries a story, and some of them are too powerful to be forgotten." Sarah examined the doll with growing fascination. The quality of the craftsmanship was exceptional even by the standards of the time. The details of the dress, with tiny hand-sewn pearls, the miniature leather shoes, and especially the glass eyes that seemed to subtly change depending on the angle of the light. "Blackwood wasn't an ordinary craftsman," continued Harold, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "They say he studied esoteric practices in Eastern Europe before settling in the United States. His dolls were considered special. Some people believed he could capture more than just the appearance of the deceased children." Sarah smiled politely at what she considered to be just local folklore, the kind of story that frequently developed around ancient objects. Her academic training inclined her to see such narratives as fascinating cultural constructs, but not as literal truths. "How much is it?" she finally asked, already decided to acquire the doll both for its historical value and for the inexplicable emotional connection she had felt. Harold seemed genuinely disturbed by the question. "I'm not sure if I should sell it," he replied, running his hand through his white hair. "This doll has returned to my shop 3 times in the past decades. The previous buyers, well, let's say they experienced events that made them return the piece." Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not dissuaded. "I'm an academic, Mr. Jenkins. I'm not easily frightened by superstitions, however fascinating they may be from an anthropological point of view." The old merchant studied her for a long moment before sighing in resignation. "Perhaps you are different. Perhaps you are the right person for Catherine finally." Sarah's return to Boston was marked by a storm that delayed her flight and left her exhausted. Upon arriving at her apartment on the 4th floor of a converted former textile factory building, she barely had the energy to unpack, carefully placing the wrapped doll on her bedroom dresser before falling into a deep sleep. It was the persistent meowing of her cat, Fitzgerald, that woke her in the middle of the night. The animal, normally calm and affectionate, was arched in the farthest corner of the room, fur bristling and eyes fixed on the dresser where the still unopened package rested. "What's wrong, Fitz? It's just an old doll," Sarah mumbled sleepily, trying to calm the animal that refused to approach her while she was in the bedroom. Attributing the strange behavior to the unfamiliar smell brought from the trip, Sarah went back to sleep, only to be awakened again by a soft sound of something falling to the floor. Upon turning on the bedside lamp, she noticed that the package had been partially unwrapped and the doll was now sitting on the floor, as if observing its new home. If you've ever had that inexplicable feeling that you're not alone in an empty room, leave presence in the comments. I want to know how many of you have felt that spine-tingling sensation that science is still trying to explain. In the days that followed, Sarah began to notice small anomalies in her apartment, objects she was certain she had left left in specific places would appear elsewhere. The temperature in her bedroom fluctuated drastically without explanation, sometimes dropping so low she could see her own breath forming mist in the air. Fitzgerald adamantly refused to enter the bedroom, meowing desperately when Sarah tried to force him. The cat's behavior disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. As a historian, she was well acquainted with ancient beliefs about felines' sensitivity to supernatural presences. "I'm thinking like a superstitious person from the 19th century, not like a 21st century academic," she reprimanded herself as she positioned the doll on a shelf in her office, hoping the change of environment would calm her pet. But the change only made the situation worse. Now Fitzgerald refused to enter the office as well, and Sarah began to have difficulty concentrating on her work when in that room. The dreams began on the third night after her return. In them, Sarah found herself in a richly decorated Victorian mansion, following the sound of a crying child. The wooden stairs creaked under her feet as she climbed to the second floor, where the crying intensified. Upon opening a door at the end of a long corridor, she found a children's bedroom in flames, and in the midst of the fire that strangely did not burn her, a girl in a blue dress identical to the doll's, extending her arms in supplication. "He trapped my soul. Please help me get out," the child begged before the flames engulfed her. Sarah always woke at the same point, bathed in cold sweat and with the disturbing certainty that she was not alone in her room. On one of these nights, she swore she had seen a small silhouette standing at the foot of her bed, disappearing when she blinked. "I'm working too hard," she tried to rationalize. "The story of the doll is affecting my subconscious." This channel brings stories that challenge the boundaries between the rational and the inexplicable. If you appreciate narratives that make you question reality, leave your like and subscribe now so you don't miss any episode. The situation took an even more unsettling turn when her department colleague Dr. Michael Chen came to dinner at her apartment. Michael was known for his unwavering skepticism and purely scientific approach to history, exactly the type of person Sarah hoped would demystify her growing paranoia. As they prepared dinner in the kitchen, Michael casually asked about her acquisitions in Maine. Excited by the opportunity to discuss the doll with a rational colleague, Sarah led him to the office. Michael's reaction was immediate and unexpected. He stopped abruptly at the door, an expression of discomfort visible on his usually impassive face. "There's something wrong with that doll," he declared to Sarah's surprise. "I'm not the type who believes in energies or auras, you know that, but there's something disturbing about it, almost as if it were watching." Coming from anyone else, Sarah would have dismissed the comment, but coming from Michael, the most skeptical of skeptics, it deeply shook her. That night, after Michael's departure, Sarah decided to research more about Victor Blackwood and his dolls. Using the academic databases to which she had access, she discovered that Blackwood had been a Romanian immigrant who settled in the United States in the 1870s, specializing in creating memorial dolls, a common practice in the Victorian era. He quickly gained notoriety among wealthy families who had lost children. What differentiated his works, according to the articles she found, was the disturbing realism he managed to imprint on the features. The special glass eyes, created by Blackwood, seemed to follow observers around the room, quoted a newspaper from 1885. Deepening her research, Sarah found a reference to Catherine Miller in a local Oakwood Harbor newspaper. Tragic fire claims the life of young Catherine Miller, 8 years old, while family slept. Parents and brother escaped unharmed. The date of the fire, October 17, 1887, made Sarah freeze. It was exactly tomorrow's date, just 138 years later. The coincidence of the fire date awakened Sarah's investigative instinct. Determined to discover more about the Miller family and Catherine's doll, she requested a one-week leave from her academic obligations, citing urgent research. Her first step was to visit the Massachusetts Historical Archive, where she spent hours examining microfilms of old newspapers. The reports about the fire revealed disturbing details. The fire had inexplicably started in Catherine's room during the night, but was limited only to that room, as if it had a specific purpose. Even more intriguing was discovering that 3 weeks after the funeral, the Miller family had commissioned a memorial doll from Victor Blackwood, paying an exorbitant sum for the work. The craftsman promised to capture not only the appearance, but the essence of the deceased, said a social note of the time, a phrase that now gave Sarah chill. If you believe objects can absorb energies from their previous owners, type memory in the comments. Modern science is just beginning to explore concepts that ancient cultures considered common knowledge. Deepening her research, Sarah discovered a disturbing pattern of tragedies associated with the Miller family after the doll's arrival. First, Catherine's younger brother, William, just 5 years old, was found drowned in the property's lake, apparently trying to follow his sister, who was calling him from the water. 6 months later, the father, Jonathan Miller, a prosperous timber merchant, committed suicide in his office, leaving only a cryptic note. "She won't let me sleep. She says she's trapped, and it's my fault." The mother, Elizabeth Miller, was admitted to the Oakwood Harbor State Asylum a month later, diagnosed with acute melancholia and delusion. The medical records, which Sarah accessed through academic contacts, contained disturbing notes. Patient insists that her daughter's soul is imprisoned in the memorial doll, claims to hear the child's voice asking for liberation, refuses to separate from the object, constantly embracing it and conversing with it. What really made Sarah's blood run cold were the records she found about subsequent families who owned the doll. The Miller mansion was sold after Elizabeth's death in the asylum in 1890, and the doll remained with the property. The Thornton family, who bought the house, lost their 7-year-old daughter to a mysterious fever just 3 months after moving in. In her feverish delirium, the girl supposedly talked about the girl in the blue dress who wanted to play with her forever. The Thorntons hastily left the mansion, abandoning many of their belongings, including the doll. This pattern repeated with variations over the decades. Families would move in, experience inexplicable phenomena, suffer tragic losses, and eventually flee or return the doll to local antique dealers, from where it always found its way back to new, unsuspecting victims. Stories like this make us question the limits of what we know about our world. If you want to continue exploring these mysteries with me, hit the bell to be notified about new episodes and leave your like to support the channel. The final piece of the puzzle came when Sarah, following an obscure reference found in an 1888 newspaper, discovered that Victor Blackwood had kept detailed diaries of his work. After his death in mysterious circumstances in 1902, found in his atelier with an expression of absolute terror frozen on his face, his belongings were donated to the Oakwood Harbor Historical Society. A call to Harold Jenkins confirmed her suspicion. The diaries existed and were kept in the basement of the Relics and Memories shop. "I was wondering when you would call," said Harold with a voice that showed no surprise. "Catherine has started to manifest, hasn't she?" When Sarah confirmed, describing the strange events and her recurring dreams, the old antiquarian sighed deeply. Blackwood's diaries explain everything. He wasn't just a craftsman, but a practitioner of what he called the art of soul anchoring. He believed he could offer comfort to grieving families by creating receptacles for the souls of deceased children. Sarah arranged an emergency trip back to Oakwood Harbor, arriving on the eve of the fire's anniversary. Harold was waiting for her at the shop after closing hours, with an old leather trunk on the counter. "These are Blackwood's diaries," he explained, opening the trunk to reveal a collection of dark, leather-bound notebooks, the pages yellowed by time. He meticulously documented each doll he created and the rituals he used. Sarah spent hours deciphering Blackwood's elaborate handwriting, discovering horrors that defied her rational view of the world. The craftsman described how he had studied occult practices in the Carpathians, learning to capture vital essences in inanimate objects. His first experiments with animals evolved into attempts with humans when he returned to the United States. The memorial dolls were his masterpiece, using personal belongings of the deceased children, locks of hair, and, more disturbingly, vital essence collected at the moment of passing. He performed rituals rituals to attract and trap fragments of their souls in the doll. The case of Catherine Miller occupied several pages of the diary, with details that made Sarah question her own sanity as she read. Blackwood had been hired by the Miller family even before the fire to create a common doll as a birthday gift for Catherine. During his visit to the mansion to take measurements and make sketches of the girl, he described how he became enchanted by the exceptional purity of her vital essence and decided she would be his perfect receptacle. The following pages detailed a meticulous plan that Sarah could hardly believe. Blackwood had deliberately caused the fire that killed Catherine, using some kind of incendiary device placed under the girl's bed during his visit. Present in the vicinity at the time of the tragedy, he described how he collected the essence at the exact moment of separation between body and soul, using an artifact he called the black amber prism. The subsequent ritual to bind the soul to the doll lasted 3 days and 3 nights, and Blackwood wrote with disturbing pride about his greatest success, a doll that contained not just the likeness, but a real portion of Catherine Miller's soul. The horror of the revelation left Sarah in a state of shock. The man who created the doll wasn't just a talented craftsman, but a murderer who deliberately took Catherine's life for his macabre experiments. "Is there any way to undo this?" she asked Harold, her voice trembling with emotion and exhaustion. The antiquarian pointed to the last pages of Blackwood's final diary. He feared his creations might turn against him. In the last years of his life, he developed a liberation ritual, a method to unbind the trapped souls from the objects. The instructions were complex and required specific ingredients, including a personal object of the child that hadn't been used in the original ritual, something Sarah didn't possess. "The Miller mansion still exists," informed Harold. "It was converted into a small local museum about the region's maritime history. Perhaps there you'll find something that belonged to Catherine. If you believe some souls can remain trapped in this world due to unfinished business, type liberation in the comments. Cultures from around the world share this belief, regardless of their differences. As Sarah prepared to visit the old Miller mansion the following morning, the phenomena in her hotel room intensified dramatically. The doll, which she had brought with her, seemed to have gained new energy in the place where its story began. The room temperature oscillated violently, objects moved without explanation, and Sarah clearly heard whispers of a child's voice when she tried to sleep. "Help me, please. He won't let me go. I've been trapped for so long." In her dreams, Catherine appeared no longer amid the flames, but sitting in a Victorian garden, explaining that Blackwood had divided her soul into 3 parts, one trapped in the doll, another at the site of her death, and the third in an amber medallion that the craftsman always carried with him. "To free me, the 3 parts need to be reunited and then released during the exact anniversary of my death," the girl explained. Upon waking, Sarah found the doll sitting in the chair beside her bed, no longer where she had left it, and a message scratched on the bathroom mirror with what appeared to be lipstick. "Tomorrow, at midnight, my last chance." The visit to the Miller mansion the next morning proved more fruitful than Sarah had hoped. Converted into a small local museum, the place preserved several original family objects, including a display case dedicated to the Miller tragedy that briefly mentioned the fire. Among the displayed items, Sarah found a small, leather-bound diary belonging to Catherine, preserved because it was kept in her father's desk at the time of the fire. The museum curator, intrigued by Sarah's academic interest, allowed her to examine the diary using conservation gloves. The pages contained childish drawings, notes about daily life, and crucially, mentions of a special medallion that the girl had hidden in her secret place in the garden because it seemed hot and made strange noises. Sarah immediately recognized the description of the amber artifact used by Blackwood in his ritual. With permission to explore the gardens, now partially preserved as part of the museum, she followed the clues left in the diary to an old ornamental fountain. The mystery is approaching its climax. If you're as involved in this story as I am in telling it, leave your like and share it with someone who also appreciates narratives that challenge our understanding of reality. Carefully excavating at the base of the fountain, where the diary indicated was Catherine's secret hiding place, Sarah found a small metal box corroded by time. Inside, Inside, wrapped in a faded silk handkerchief, was a black amber medallion with inscriptions in a language she didn't recognize. Upon touching the object, a wave of nausea and vertigo hit her with such force that she nearly fainted. Fragmented visions invaded her mind. Catherine playing in the garden, the terrible moment when she woke to find her room in flames, Blackwood's face watching her through the window as she screamed for help, and then darkness, followed by a suffocating sensation of imprisonment that lasted and lasted. Sarah understood she was experiencing Catherine's own memories, confirming everything she had discovered. With the medallion secure in her bag and the girl's diary borrowed from the curator, who relented after Sarah invented a convincing story about her academic research, she returned to Harold's shop to prepare the liberation ritual. The hours preceding midnight were filled with meticulous preparation. Following the instructions from Blackwood's diary, Sarah and Harold created a protection circle using sea salt and specific herbs in the shop's basement, where the antiquarian revealed he kept various occultist items from his own collection. In the center of the circle, they positioned the doll, the medallion, and Catherine's diary, representing the three parts of her divided soul. The ritual must begin exactly at 11:42 p.m., the recorded moment of her death, explained Harold, consulting an antique pocket watch. As the hour approached, the supernatural activity around them intensified, lights flickering, objects falling from shelves, and a cold mist that seemed to emanate from the doll itself. Sarah began to recite the words in Latin and Romanian from the liberation ritual, her voice trembling initially, but gaining strength as she proceeded. At the exact moment the clock struck 11:42, a palpable change occurred in the basement's atmosphere. The doll began to vibrate violently, and the amber medallion emitted a sickly glow that illuminated the environment with an unnatural greenish light. Sarah continued the recitation, even when an invisible force began to pull the book from her hands, and the pressure in the environment increased to the point of making her ears pop. A voice that did not belong to this world echoed through the basement, deep, masculine, and furious. "She belongs to me! You cannot free her!" Harold was thrown against the wall by an invisible force, falling unconscious, but Sarah persisted, determined to complete the ritual. When she pronounced the final words, an explosion of energy threw her to the ground, and for a terrible moment, she thought she had failed. Then, in the sudden silence that followed, a soft, golden light emanated from the doll, gradually taking the form of a girl in a blue dress. Catherine appeared before Sarah, no longer as the tormented figure from her dreams, but radiant and at peace. "You did it," said the girl with a smile that illuminated her entire being. "I'm free after so long." Sarah, still dazed, asked why the spirit had chosen her among so many previous owners of the doll. "Because you were the only one who truly wanted to know me, not just possess a valuable object," Catherine replied. "You sought the truth about me, not just about the doll." Before disappearing, the girl made one last request. "Find the others. Blackwood created 27 dolls like me. There are other trapped children who need help." With these words, Catherine's luminous form dissipated like mist in the sun, leaving behind only the now ordinary doll. The eyes that once seemed alive were now just painted glass, the cold porcelain just a lifeless material. Sarah understood that she had just accepted a mission that would change the course of her life forever. Sarah Thompson's return to Boston marked the beginning of a new phase in her life, one that transcended the boundaries of her academic career and launched her into a journey that few would understand. In her apartment, now free from the disturbing phenomena, she meticulously organized all the information collected about Victor Blackwood and his memorial doll. The craftsman's diary, which Harold had insisted she take with her, became her most valuable tool in the search for the other 26 dolls mentioned by Catherine. The list of names and grieving families who had commissioned Blackwood's macabre works transformed into a map that would guide her through the next years of her life. What had begun as a casual acquisition during summer vacation had transformed into a spiritual rescue mission that defied everything she believed she knew about reality. Colleagues in the history department noticed the change in Sarah. Her new interest in 19th century funerary practices, her obsession with obscure Victorian doll craftsmen, and her frequent trips to small towns in search of specific artifacts for her research. Only Michael Uncle Chen, who had witnessed the strange energy emanating from Catherine's doll, suspected there was something deeper motivating his colleague. When Sarah finally confided in him about her experience in Oakwood Harbor, she expected incredulity or concern for her mental health. Instead, she found an unexpected ally. "My grandmother in China was what they called a soul seeker," revealed Michael. "She helped lost spirits find their way. I always believed they were just folk tales until I felt what was in that doll in your apartment." As the months passed, Sarah's search for Blackwood's dolls proved both rewarding and dangerous. Each doll found brought with it a unique story of tragedy. Children whose passage to the beyond had been interrupted by the perverse ambition of a man who played at being God. Some of the dolls were in museums, others in private collections, and some had been destroyed by terrified owners. Though Sarah discovered that destroying the receptacle did not free the soul, only left it in an even more desperate state. Each liberation ritual required meticulous research about the imprisoned child, locating personal objects not contaminated by the original ritual, and performing the ceremony on the exact anniversary of their death. It was exhausting work that tested the limits of her physical and emotional endurance. The most profound transformation, however, occurred in Sarah's own worldview. The historian who once based her understanding of reality exclusively on verifiable documents and tangible evidence now navigated comfortably in the realm of the intangible. She learned to recognize the subtle signs of spiritual presence, to interpret dreams as messages, and to trust intuitions she would have previously dismissed as superstition. This personal evolution was reflected in her academic career in unexpected ways. Her new course on mourning objects and memorial practices in Victorian America became the most popular in the department, attracting students not only from history but also from anthropology, psychology, and religious studies. Without revealing her true motivations, Sarah was educating a new generation to recognize the fine line between common objects and receptacles of memory and energy. 7 years after her encounter with Catherine Miller's doll, Sarah had located and freed 23 of the 27 souls imprisoned by Blackwood. Each liberation brought with it a moment of transcendental beauty, the vision of a child finally free after decades of confinement, expressing gratitude before moving on to what lay beyond. These moments sustained Sarah through the difficulties, dangers, and occasional failures in her mission. The 4 remaining dolls presented unique challenges. One was supposedly at the bottom of the ocean after the shipwreck of a collector's vessel in 1937. Another had disappeared during World War II when the mansion housing it was looted. The last 2 had such obscure clues that they seemed to have been deliberately hidden. But Sarah would not give up. Each child deserved the peace that Catherine had finally found. On a quiet night, while organizing her notes on the next doll she would seek, Sarah felt a familiar presence in her office. It wasn't threatening or cold like the previous manifestations, but warm and comforting. Looking at the window, she saw the reflection not only of herself, but briefly of Catherine and the other children she had helped, all smiling in silent approval. In that moment, she understood that her life had found a purpose that transcended any academic ambition or professional recognition she might have aspired to. In a world that insisted on the division between science and spirituality, between the verifiable and the mysterious, Sarah had found her place as a bridge between realities, a historian not only of the tangible past, but of the souls that had left indelible marks on the objects they left behind. And as the presence gently dissipated, she smiled and whispered, "I will find all of you. This is my promise."